Hey there, thanks for tuning in. This is the professional seminar for sophomores and juniors. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Sharif, and I'm one of the mentors for sophomores and juniors for the sophomore and junior program. So let's get started with our virtual session. For today's talk, we have two guest speakers. First is Neville. Now, to be honest, Neville is a little bit of a dork. He's short, he's unathletic, he speaks too loudly, and he's not very bright. I know this seems harsh, but it's true. The next guy is Ryan. Now, Ryan is a guy that you're going to want to listen very carefully to. Ryan is extremely athletic. He's talented in many ways. In fact, his IQ is over 140, which means it's higher than 99.6% of every single other human being that has ever lived. Okay, I hope that gives you a good impression of them before you get to meet them. They should be here any minute. Well, I guess I'll tell you a little bit more about them. Neville, during high school, he started running a few miles a day. Each morning, he started doing 100 push-ups. Over the summer, he decided he wanted to start reading a lot, and he got a job at a local mortgage company, and he ended up going to Notre Dame. Now, it was definitely a reach school for him, but he wrote an awesome college essay. I guess that's what reading will do for you. Long story short, Neville graduated college, he got a job at that same mortgage company, and now he's married, he has a wife, kids, everything that a man could want. After only 15 years, he became head of the mortgage company, and then he decided that he wanted to make an impact on his community. He ran for mayor and he won, and now he's running for the state legislature, and by all accounts, he has a great shot at winning. Okay, let's turn back to Ryan. Well, Ryan never really hit his stride. He was always good at sports, but he could never find the one that he liked. So he never committed to one enough to really develop his abilities. Classwork always came pretty easy for him, so he never had to study very hard. He eventually got into college. He, in fact, also went to Notre Dame. But because he hadn't developed the habit of study, he didn't really do so well. He is an excellent video game player, though. Now, after college, Ryan got a job at a finance firm. In fact, now he still has the same job. At least he's consistent. And now he has enough money to pay rent on his one-bedroom apartment. But he did recently purchase the new Apple Watch. That's pretty cool, right? Well, anyway, that's pretty much all I can tell you about Ryan's life. Well, by now you've probably realized that Neville and Ryan aren't going to make it to speak with us today. In fact, you may have even realized that Neville and Ryan do not actually exist. I made them up for a reason. I wanted to illustrate that where we start does not determine where we end up. Much more depends on the size of our soul. Now, you might be thinking at this point, what is Sharif possibly talking about? I mean, the soul is immaterial, right? It can't have a fixed extension or size. Well, let me tell you. I'm talking about the virtue of magnanimity. Magnanimity comes from the Latin magnus, which means great, and animus, which means soul. So magnanimity literally means great-souled. But I still haven't told you what it means. Aristotle gives us a definition of magnanimity that, let's just show it on the screen here for you. Magnanimity is a habit of mind whereby we aspire to achieve difficult things worthy of great honor. So with this in mind, let's take a look back at the examples of Neville and Ryan. Which one of them was magnanimous? You don't have to answer that question because the answer is obvious. Of course, Neville was the magnanimous one. Even though at the beginning it seems like he didn't have the same gifts that Ryan had. Ryan seemed like he had natural athletic talent, natural intelligence that maybe Neville had to work harder to attain. But Neville really dedicated his life to pursuing great things, even though he started out with less. So with these descriptions, I've tried to highlight that our capacity to be magnanimous doesn't depend on what we start out with. We can all be great-souled. We can all be magnanimous. Whether we start out with a lot, or we start out with a little, or we start out with nothing at all, we're all capable of accomplishing great things worthy of honor. So we can think of, for example, the slaves in the South, in the American South in the 1800s. Many of them, all of them, started out with nothing and even less than nothing. But they were capable of great things. Many of them taught themselves to read and write. Many of them escaped slavery and even led some of their fellow slaves to freedom. Many of them became businessmen, educators, politicians, and authors. We're all capable of greatness. In fact, though, the more you're given, the more you start out with, the more magnanimous you can be. Perhaps you recall the memorable line from the first of the 800 Spider-Man movies made in the past couple years. With great power
comes great responsibility.
Okay, so before we move on, let's recap. First, magnanimity is the habit of mind whereby we strive to achieve great things that are worthy of honor. Second, we can all be magnanimous. And third, the more we've been given, the more we can give. Now, I realize this can be a difficult virtue to grasp, but I think one of the best ways to approach this virtue is by thinking of historical figures who have demonstrated this virtue, looking at concrete examples of how it's lived out. I also think it's helpful to understand the virtue better by connecting it with our own lives. So throughout this talk, I want to now give 3 examples of men and women throughout history who have really lived well this virtue of magnanimity. And I also want to pose some questions to you to help get you thinking of where you can grow in this area of magnanimity. So first, I'll just pose one question just to give you a sense of the flavor of the questions that are going to be coming up throughout the talk, and then I'll sprinkle the rest throughout the talk as I give those historical examples. So here's the question for you. Am I demanding on myself in my studies? There is no excuse for those who could be scholars but are not. Do I go beyond wanting a good grade to actually seeking to understand and master the material? Okay, now let's take a look back at history. I can think of few men more magnanimous than the founding fathers. Now, unlike many portraits depicting the event, the signing of the Declaration of Independence was actually a very clandestine affair. To sign this document was treason. To be involved in its creation merited certain death at the hands of the British. But every single founder persevered in this difficult endeavor in pursuit of fundamental human rights and justice, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all citizens. And they were certainly magnanimous. Just consider some of the closing words to the Declaration of Independence. And for the support of this declaration, we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. These guys quite clearly aspired to achieve great things worthy of honor. So now we can ask ourselves, here are a few questions. When put in front of me, do I always choose the noblest thing, even if it is more difficult? Does the time I spend watching TV, listening to music, or using my phone curtail my efforts to pursue noble actions? Do I realize that those who watch TV are rarely ever on TV, and vice versa? Now let's turn to our second historical example, Joan of Arc, one of the great military commanders of world history. Joan of Arc was born about the year 1412, around the 75th year of the 100 Years' War between France and England. By this time, the war looked all but lost for France. The French army was in complete disarray. France had no king. The people were hopeless. England had military and political control over many regions of France. Now, Joan of Arc was born in a tiny town in France. Her father was a farmer. Once during her childhood, the English troops came and burned down the entire town that she lived in. Now, at the age of only 16, I'm not joking, she was 16, Joan of Arc requested command of the entire French army. With her confidence and her charisma, her magnanimity, she won the hearts and the service of the French troops. She led them into battle and defeated the English troops in some key strategic positions. The military commanders of the time said that her strategy was absolutely astonishing and, not to mention, effective. And this coming from someone who had absolutely no military training. She was 16, born in a small town. In just over a year commanding the French army, she had the English on the run. She had restored the French king to power, and she had regained control of much of France for the French. Let me repeat that. In just over a year, a 16-year-old with no military experience took over an army that was in shambles and defeated one of the great military powers of the world to basically end a war that had been going on for 75 years and seemed at that point to be completely hopeless. Now we can ask ourselves, does my love of comfort lead me to shy away from greatness? Am I prepared to do what's necessary to change that? Am I confident in all aspects of my life? Do I look people in the eye when speaking with them? And do I have a firm handshake? Okay, we can now turn to our last story. During the 1960s, the space race. Now, many people thought it was impossible to reach the moon. In fact, some crazy people think still that it has never happened. We can think that just 50 years before, the Wright brothers had just figured out how to get a man off the surface of the Earth. Now, only 50 years later, we're considering sending a man all the way up to the moon. It's an astonishing development. And it was the magnanimous actions of JFK and the NASA astronauts that made all this possible. Although he didn't live to see it accomplished, Kennedy challenged Congress to fund the space race in a famous speech in 1961. His eloquent words ring through with magnanimity. Before the close of this decade, I challenge you to put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth. Well, it happened, and a lot of good has come from it. Breakthroughs in medicine, breakthroughs in science, even freeze-dried food. Neil Armstrong's words of July 20th, 1969 sum it up. That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. So now let's ask ourselves, are we aspiring to achieve greatness in our own lives? What are we doing? It's worth the effort. Do I put limits on my goals or professional plans out of fear of failure? Do I realize that I thereby do a great disservice to myself and to society? Are the goals I set each month with my mentor demanding and relevant? Do I exercise the virtues needed to make these goals a reality? I think the last story from history, landing on the moon, is a good one to end on. Now, we may be kind of used to it by now, but we can always remember what a great feat of human ingenuity this really was. Now, let me take this occasion to address a potential flaw that we could have in our reasoning here. One might say that one might confuse magnanimity with pride. They could think that someone aspires to great things because they think they're better than other people. So they would say, isn't magnanimity really just pride? Now, I want to be very clear. Magnanimity is not arrogance and pride. We are not magnanimous because we think we are better than other people. We're magnanimous because we recognize the gifts that we've received, we have a desire to give back, and we acknowledge that responsibility that we have to our friends, our family, and our society to make the best use of our potential, to serve them. Now, behind this criticism, I think, is a certain false humility that leads us to think, oh, who, me? No, I can't do that. I'm stupid. I don't know anything. Who am I to take on great things? Come on. We all know that's just a cloak for laziness. It's just an excuse to spend our day lying on the couch, watching TV, playing video games, listening to Netflix, and eating Oreos. Magnanimity protects us from this laziness and this false humility by inspiring us to hope for great things and to overcome this natural tendency that we all have towards seeking comfort. Let me close by saying that magnanimity is for everyone, especially you if you're watching this video. Now, you might be tempted to say to yourself, how can I strive for great things? I can barely even load the dishwasher up properly. That's false humility coming back. The fact is that you're in the grade, and that means that you have parents who love you and care about your formation and your education. And this is a great gift that you've received, and it can motivate you to desire to do great things, to give back to the family and the community that's done so much for you and for me. It means that you too can strive to do difficult and great things. You yourself can fulfill your potential and help others. You can be a great soul. You can be magnanimous. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you and your families are doing well during the COVID-19 outbreak. I also want to encourage you to use all the free time that you have at home wisely to make the most out of it. So thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to doing virtual mentoring with you guys soon.